Guten Abend, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Violas, welcome to Munich. It's a full house, but it will be a royal flash, I tell you. Mit dem heutigen Abend, mit dem Vortrag Video Art, Sense, Perception and Human Experience, dieses Thema eröffnet den Zyklus der letzten 3 Vorträge, mit denen Iconic Turn nach 23 Vorträgen zu Ende geht. Was war der Ausgangspunkt? In den Gesprächen, die ich mit Felix oft hatte, wir beide haben ja Kunstgeschichte studiert, ging es immer wieder darum, wie kann man zu dem, was das Fach an Wissen und Erkenntnissen, sei es das große Feld der historischen Zusammenhänge oder das Speziellere der Ästhetik, an dem Bewährten festhalten, sich aber nicht verschließen vor dem, was am Ende des vergangenen Jahrhunderts, also dem 20. Jahrhundert, begann und was den Titel für diese Reihe abgab, Iconic Turn. Mit dem Aufkommen der PCs und der Entwicklung digitaler Medien ist eine Situation entstanden, in der die Bilder mit der gleichen Geschwindigkeit um den Erdball gehen wie Sprache und Texte. Was sind die Auswirkungen? Was bedeutet diese Fülle von neuen Bildern für unsere Wahrnehmung? Wie verändert sich Kommunikation? Und wo immer sich Kommunikation verändert, verändern sich grundlegende Fundamente der Gesellschaft. Ich bin zutiefst überzeugt, dass wir in einer Zeit leben, die so gravierend ist wie die Gutenberg-Erfindung, mit der, wie wir ja alle einmal gelernt haben, die Neuzeit begann. Und so wie die Mönche damals, die Gutenberg-Jünger, bei Victor Hugo kann man es nachlesen, ceux-ci ont tué ceux-là, sagt er, diese Kerle da, diese Gutenberg-Kerle, die ja nur mit Senkblei und Schnüren arbeiten, haben eine ganze Welt vernichtet, sagt Victor Hugo, die Welt der Kathedralen, die Welt dessen, was Francis Yates mal als unser Gedächtnistheater, eine Kathedrale sein Gedächtnistheater. Wir haben früher eben ganz anders gespeichert und Wissen ganz anders abgerufen. Also die Gutenberg-Jünger haben die Welt der mittelalterlichen Wandmalereien und Buchmalereien in Frage gestellt und mit einem ähnlichen Vorteil hatten wir es auch zu tun, denn es hieß ja im ausgehenden Mittelalter ab Petrarca, Pitture sunt illiterati, also die Bilder sind eben für die, die nicht lesen und schreiben können, ein leicht pejorativer Beigeschmack. Und so war eigentlich auch klar, dass der Semantik-Term, Chomsky und so weiter, dass der Semantik-Term eigentlich in der Hierarchie vor dem Iconic Turn stünde. Mit Bill Viola treffen wir heute Abend auf, ich glaube, den herausragenden Künstler im Bereich einer neuen Technik, von der man mit Fug und Recht sagen kann, dass mit den neuen Mitteln von Video und Computer eine Form gefunden wurde, die vielleicht die deutlichste Antwort darstellt auf das, was Hans Belting einmal provokant als das Ende des Tafelbildes formuliert hat. Ich will seinem Vortrag nicht vorgreifen, aber es ist faszinierend, wie Renaissance und barocke Kunst in einem neuen Kontext erscheinen, sei es seine Beschäftigung mit Signorelli oder wie über das, was Felix gearbeitet hat, über Pozzo, sei es Raphael oder Michelangelo, die er in den Vatikanischen Museen eingehend studiert hat. Und es ist faszinierend, sich mit ihm über jenes 1503, 1504 zu unterhalten, wo Michelangelo, der schwierige und Raphael, der charmantere, der viel umgänglicher war, wie die zwei sich begegnet oder auch gemieden haben auf engstem Raum damals. Der eine, der an der Sistina arbeitete, und der andere in den Stanzen. In dem Fokus-Interview, was Gabi Chopin gemacht hat, sagt er, die Einführung des bewegten Bildes in die Praxis zeitgenössischer Künstler ist mit der Erfindung der Perspektive in der Renaissance vergleichbar, als Künstler plötzlich fähig waren, Bildtiefe und Raum darzustellen. Das hat im 15. Jahrhundert die gesamte Kultur verändert. Für uns ist die Zentralperspektive so eine Verabredung geworden, dass wir uns überhaupt nicht vorstellen können, dass die mittelalterliche Kunst eine ganz andere Perspektive kannte, nämlich die Bedeutungsperspektive. Das, was groß ist, Gott und die Heiligen kommen groß im Bild vor und das andere ist eben kleiner. Aber wir haben uns an das gewöhnt, das ist unser Blick geworden, auch der Blick von Windows, von Microsoft in der Zwischenzeit. Wir haben die Zentralperspektive als das gängige Verfahren zur Darstellung von Wirklichkeit akzeptiert. Und das begann, muss man wissen, mit Brunelleschi, mit Alberti um 1420, 1430. Chris Dercon wird einführen. Seien Sie herzlich willkommen in diesem Kreis. Sie sind der neue Chef des Hauses der Kunst und die Münchner mögen Sie gern. Sie haben den guten kreativen Geist von Christoph Vitali mit interessanten Projekten fortgeführt. Sie kennen Bill Viola seit 25 Jahren und ich könnte mir niemand Besseren vorstellen als Sie, der uns jetzt etwas einführt in das Werk von Bill Viola, der dann zu uns sprechen wird. Schön, dass Sie da sind.
Meine Damen und Herren, für 20 Jahre habe ich mein erstes Gespräch mit Bill Viola geführt, für einen Fernsehfilm über Videokunst. Und ich war absolut beeindruckt. Ich war beeindruckt, wie präzise der 32-jährige Bill Viola, er kam gerade zurück aus Japan mit seinem Mitarbeiterpartner Kira Perov. Ich war beeindruckt, wie präzise der junge Viola die Zukunft voraussah. Und zwar nicht nur, was die technische Zukunft des Medium Video an sich betrifft, sondern auch die weitere Entwicklung seiner eigenen künstlerischen Arbeit. Und darum beginne ich den heutigen Abend mit wenigen Bildern zu Bill Viola, wie ich ihn und seine Arbeit für 20 Jahre kennenlernen. Kira and Bill, I took a little surprise for you. Very old images, 20 years ago. Look at Bill Viola and what he said. It's important for you kids. Können wir die Videobilder haben, bitte?
Video, there is never a complete image. The idea of a still image only really happens on film or photography in the sense of a complete frame at one time. Video is just this moving point of light that's always scanning, and it's nothing to do with stillness at all. So even if you shoot a still scene, there's this quality, this high velocity image. Maybe there's nothing moving in the video in the image itself, but there's always movement because there's this scanning. So it's incredibly. We're looking at this thing that's flashing, like a light. It's very violent in a certain kind of strange way.
Danke. Bitte entschuldigen Sie mir für die schlechte Qualität der Bilder. Es handelt sich hier wirklich um eine Art Medienarchäologie und die Bilder heute Abend von Bill Viola sind natürlich viel, viel schöner und viel besser. Meine Damen und Herren, es gibt vielerlei Möglichkeiten, an Bill Violas Arbeiten heranzutreten. Und ich habe mich für heute Abend für eine sehr hoffentlich aktuelle Herangehensweise entschieden. Die Zukunft erscheint als eine Art Vergangenheit, die man im Rückspiegel eines schnell vorbeireisenden Fahrzeugs betrachtet. Und diesen Rückspiegel betrifft für mich die Geschichte von Kino. Das ist meine persönliche Herangehensweise. Vor 2 Jahren zeigten wir zusammen mit Kira Pero von Viola in das Museum Boijmans von Beuningen in Rotterdam in der Ausstellung Hieronymus Bosch eine Arbeit von Viola, The Quintet of the Astonished. Und hierfür nahm Viola Bosches Gemälde Christus wird verspottet, die Dornenkrönung, als Ausgangspunkt für eine außergewöhnliche Videoinstallation. Violas Installation befand sich am Ende der Ausstellung und zusammen mit den Meisterwerken von Bosch selbst eine der erfolgreichsten Arbeiten der Ausstellung. Das extreme Zeitlupentempo und die Reihe der emotionalen Konflikte lassen die Zuschauer innehalten. Meine Damen und Herren, da die Muttersprache unseres Referenten Englisch ist, bitte ich um Verständnis, dass ich jetzt auf Englisch fortfahre und das ist auch einfacher für mich selber. Bill, we increasingly understand that what we call usually cinema, thus that which is projected in a movie theater through a specific system and a specific device, the system and device of cinema, has become completely challenged today. And those challenges come from the side of what is usually called video art or a little bit better media art. Indeed, there is not a very good word for it yet. Be that as it may, the installations of Viola demonstrate that there is a series of works made by artists today with the possibility as some sort of iconic turn to turn the cinema as we know it into something else. To be some sort of new cinema by new means shown in the public situation of an art exhibition rather than in a movie theater. Or should we say that those works by, for instance, Viola are turning our attention again to the beginning and the origin of cinema. The film fest in Munich, in general, evokes the impression that on the one hand, film will follow its familiar path and always be projected in movie theaters. On the other hand, however, when we look at recent filmic installations in the Lembach House by James Coleman, in the Pinakothek der Moderne by Pipi Lotterist, jetzt in the Haus der Kunst by Jon Bock, or even the works of Jeff Wall in the collection of Frau Götz, it seems that cinema is indeed in the process of becoming a new form. And in this new type of spatial situation, which used to be devoted to painting and sculpture, filmic installations, I don't know a better word, compete increasingly and in various ways with cinema as we know it. What happens now is that the physical space of the installation, for instance, through the use of large video projectors, and Viola is indeed using very large video projections, is becoming more filmic and opens up a real dialogue with the cinema. I'm thinking, for instance, of Viola's works Going Forth by Day, realized in the Guggenheim spaces, or 5 Angels for the Millennium, which we're going to see a bit of later tonight at the Gasometer in Oberhausen. These kind of works lead us into directions we do not really know, but we do know something. We need to remember that all that was prepared throughout the 19th century by various types of cinematographical instruments and installations. And such installations have been preparing different types of spectators. Also the spectators engaging with or enjoying the works of Bill Viola. Felix Burda Stengel, in his fascinating book about Andrea Pozzo und die Videokunst, und Sie müssen das wirklich kaufen, heute Abend unten. Das faszinierende Buch Andrea Pozzo und die Videokunst, neue Überlegungen zum barocken Illusionismus, Felix Burda Stengel goes even further and convincingly makes the connection between video installations like the one by Bill Viola and the spatial inventions of Baroque painting. He states that those works depend heavily on the interaction with the spectator, das Mitspielen des Betrachters, viel schöner than in English. For example, what did Bill Viola do in his extraordinary installation called Slowly Turning Narrative? An installation which is in the book of Felix Burda Stengel and in many books listed as a key work of Bill Viola, a work from 1992. It is an installation, Slowly Turning Narrative, located in a rectangular room divided in two parts by a huge revolving screen, ein drehenden Leinwand, which consists of a mirror on one side. Auf einer Seite ist diese Wand verspiegelt. And two different types of images are projected from both ends of the room. An image of a man and images of the world. Excuse me, Bill, for being so simple about it, but we have to go on. And as this structure is slowly turning through the room, one sees the entire room reflected on one side with the mirror and one's own body as a spectator circulating with the mirror. And therefore the title Slowly Turning Narrative is magnificent because it expands the common link we have with 20th century narrative situation in the cinema. We begin also to understand that the viewing experience of the museum and the movie theater, of the Pinakothek de Moderne and the Ari Kino, which used to be separate, are now in a process of completely being mixed. Bill Viola's work, however, not only plays structurally, that is, in the way he occupies space and spaces, Bill Viola's work not only plays structurally a key role in this sort of expanding the museum and expanding the cinema, he also gives us, at the level of the image itself, das Bild selber, a lot to work with. First of all the works of Bill Viola are indeed narrative. And above all, they are slow narratives. How does he do that? Very simple and very complex. One, his works always show the human presence in a given or fabricated space. First, in the beginning, the space of television, then the space of a video monitor, and later, the space of an existing room, and even more recent, a spatial construction of a kind of new room. Two, after creating and occupying space, the time his images and sounds absorb is there to create indeed another kind of human space. Because for Bill Viola, time is not a question of a straight line, but a bundling of concentric circles. And as such, the time necessary to perceive his images and his sounds is able to create space, human space. He slowly transforms natural landscapes such as rocks or deserts, constellations of water and fire, and human bodies and faces into something else. Let's call them psychological landscapes. And after creating human space, occupying space, after using time and sounds to create yet another kind of human space, Viola started also to occupy some kind of historical human space. That is the space of old masters' paintings, and Mr. Hubert Burda brilliantly analyzed and gave some examples. The time, that is the space of old master paintings of the Italian Renaissance through Flemish and Dutch masters. And what does he do to these images, to these paintings? He adds time to them. But it's not time as we know it. It is time like the movement of an empty vessel on rocking water. In fact, Viola adds or projects our imagination on those paintings. Viola is giving us an expanded cinema, an expanded museum, by expanding the history of painting. Viola's work is about slow histories. That is our history, the history of mankind. His art is resisting time and the passage of time while showing it. He is turning icons into iconic turns. Das Mitspielen der Betrachter in video installations like the ones of Viola is both a question of physical and intellectual mobility. We see in the work of Viola, in one or another way, the return of cinema, the return of a long-lost cinema. And we can now go back to a long-lost cinema thanks to the computer and the digital image. It is, when watching Viola, as if we have missed out a real beginning of cinema. Thank you, Viola.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. You've given me a lot of new things to say about my work when I do interviews. I want to thank Dr. Burda, Chris DeMar, and everyone at the Foundation for inviting me to do this talk. It is truly very special, and I feel a lot of connections with the kind of intellectual as well as emotional feelings that you and your staff have in the Foundation to promote art in a very human kind of way. So I thank you. I'm going to talk tonight in a way, about the source of images, which as an artist, for all artists, we are possibly the closest to. But I do believe that all people have a deep innate ability to create their own images. And it's this continual process of creation, whether you're a professional artist or just a normal person going about their life, that is at the root of human creativity and the drive that human beings seem to have to always be moving forward into new and unknown regions. Being an artist and working in museums, I find it astonishing that I can go into a museum and see an object that's 500 years old and have a connection to it from a time and place that I know nothing about in terms of the daily inner life of the people who made those objects. Yet there is a connection across all of that time and space. So I want to talk about this idea of the traces of the self that are contained in the objects and the things that are around us. The spark of life, the connecting thread that draws us to material objects, to immaterial objects, to each other. And especially my medium of video, which in the world that gives us these precious moments of sparks of life, the video speaks in the language of sparks. It has as its center living energy. So let me start with an image, which I think is the most appropriate to begin the night. And I want to show you a piece of mine from 1996. It's a
a short part, an excerpt from a piece called The Crossing. I want to show you one of two images that make up that piece. So can we please have the first video? And if we could have the lights, please. we maybe just have the house lights off? The overheads. Okay. I'm going to talk about where that man went a little later, because he can come back. Houston Smith is a scholar of world religion. He's studied all of the great faiths, as well as shamanism, for his whole life. And in the introduction to his book, The Story of the World's Religions, he described something very fundamental and I think very powerful. It struck me very deeply, his words, very simple. He said that the two things that most affect who we are today, at this moment, as human beings, the things that affect our inner lives as well as our outer lives, the most deeply and powerfully, are technology and revelation. Technology and revelation. The physical and the metaphysical. The body and the soul. And, in our language today, hardware and software. And this unique point that we find ourselves at between those two worlds, that is the place of human beings. And those two areas are not as different as you might think. And of course, I realized as an artist that that is in fact what we do. Those are the things we work with. That's our material. We work with technology and we work with revelation, which transforms the technology. So I'm going to share a story with you that is one of my very favorite stories. It was told by an anthropologist, American anthropologist named Megan Beasley. And Megan was working with the Kalahari Bush people in the 1970s in Namibia, in the southern part of Africa. Very, very ancient culture. Very, very old culture. And she was getting to know some of the women and speaking with them, spending a lot of time. And one woman told her this story, and this is what I want to share with you. A woman named Bay was alone in the bush one day when she saw a herd of giraffes running before an approaching thunderstorm. The rolling beat of their hooves grew louder and mingled in her head with the sound of sudden rain. Suddenly, a song she had never heard before came to her, and she began to sing. Gawa, the great god, told her it was a medicine song, a magic song. Bay went home and taught the song to her husband, Tike. They sang and danced it together, and it was indeed a song for trancing, a medicine song. Tike taught it to others who passed it on. For me, the most beautiful thing about that story is it gives us an insight into a very private moment for a very specific person, one person in their life who was in this situation, who had this experience, and something came from them, from that experience. So let's look at that again. So you have to imagine the scene, okay? She's alone. You can say here in the forest, in Namibia, it's a desert environment, but she's away from people. And she sees there's a thunderstorm coming. So that magic, you know that feeling in the air when the thunderstorm's coming? There's electricity. You can feel it, and you can sense that the plants know it too, and the animals know it. It's a very special moment. It's not normal. So this was a very charged atmosphere. And suddenly giraffes run out, startling her, something she didn't expect. And the sound of their hooves on the ground with the sound of the thunder made a song come into her head. And what does she do? She sings it. Okay? So you have these elements. You have a visual image, a perception, connected to the outside world, because the ideas are coming from the outside world. They live in the world. They're from the earth, and they're formed by the individual's interaction with the world. And so this incredible scene, very striking scene, and then a song comes. Something that never existed before. And what does she do? She sings. She puts sound back out into the world. Now this sound is mixing with the thunder and the animals. It's now outside of her body. That's the first key step. Get it out of your heart. Get it out of your mind. Put it out so we can touch it. But she's still alone. She sings a song. She comes home, maybe with some food she was gathering, but she also comes home with a song. So what does she do? The first thing is, she knows on the way home that Gawa, the great god, it says here, Gawa, the great god, told her it was a medicine song. What does that mean? That means something inside her told her this is not just an everyday song that you sing on the way home from work. This is a special one. This is a deep, special song. She knows that first from in herself, a voice. The same way artists know when you're working with all of those images, all of those things. Every once in a while, one thing comes through you and you go, that's the one. She comes home and she shares it with the person she's most close to, her husband. She's still not sure. She kind of tests it. And she sings it to him, and they sing it together. She teaches him, and they dance it together. They sang and danced it together. So here's the second step. Now it comes out to someone else. And it needs to be shared, these things. These images need to be shared. So now it's with her husband, and then he confirms that, yes, this is indeed a medicine song. This is one of those special ones. So then, and here's the politically incorrect part, it's TK, her husband, who taught it to others and took the credit for it. No, sorry, women. No, it says TK taught it to others and passed it on. So in other words, they shared it with the whole village. Now, for Megan Beasley and the anthropologist, the results of this special experience that this woman Bay had, that's what the anthropologists study. They come to the village years later, and these people are singing and dancing, and they start asking them about the songs. But they don't know about the giraffes, and they don't know about the thunderstorm. So as an artist, that's where I want to be. I want to be not studying the songs. I want to be right there with her on the front lines, right at the point when the inspiration comes, when something new comes into the world that is born, which happens all the time, that never existed before. That's where we live. That's where the artists are. And as in all these years of working in video and traveling a lot and taking my video camera with me, I did indeed feel and thought frequently about that story of Bay. I did feel that I was searching for an image, and the story sort of confirmed for me that this image was in the world somehow, somewhere. And if you can just get there to the right place, the right time, if I could just have my camera there at that moment, the image will come. And that's really what a camera does. That's one of the things what a camera does. And that's really the art of the photographer, isn't it? If you think of one medium that embodies that most of all, I would say that would be photography. They only have one chance, one frame, one image. Finding the right position is essential for the photographer. Where to put the camera. Which point of view is the best? That's the search. Position yourself. And this is also the focal point of the converging lines in Renaissance paintings, isn't it? It's the same thing. It puts you right at the center. When you step in front of a painting painted in the 15th century, you are stepping into the center today, in the present moment, that same center. It's also, this center is also the 5 sharp lines of piercing light that come down and pierce the body with the stigmata, that go right, an image that goes right into the body, converging on the human solitary being alone at the moment of peak ecstasy, one of the greatest peak moments of solitary human existence anywhere. And of course, that moment exists in many cultures throughout the world, not just the Christian European culture that we know. And this connects with the whole history of spiritual retreats, of vision quests, of going out into the wilderness, and even going into the darkness of the privacy of your own room. And what do we find when we go to these moments? What happens when, like Bay, you're alone? Very special things happen. But what happens when you go into the most extreme point you can be in terms of isolation? And that would be, I think of the American scientist John Lilly. I don't know if you know him here in Germany. He did a number of work. He was the one who started the communication with dolphins, those experiments. He also spent a lot of time in the 1950s in a sensory deprivation tank. Do you know these tanks? They're filled with water, and you go inside and you float in the water. The water is the same temperature as your blood. You have a feeling of being outside of gravity. You are weightless. This space that the tank is in is made completely dark, and it's completely silent. It is the closest thing to experiencing nothing and to experience the lack of any distinction or difference between the inside and the outside. He spent many, many hours in that environment. He wrote about it quite vividly. And the thing that's interesting about that, in that situation where there is no sensation, there's nothing, the experience of nothing, as close as you can be while still being alive, what was in there? What happened? Well, what he reported was the most vivid, powerful, overwhelming images that he had ever experienced in his life. So there he was, floating in this dark space in this tank, taking away everything that can give us a sense of presence in the world, and the thing that remains are the images coming uncontrollably, just waves and waves of images coming over him. So human beings will always create images. That reminds me of the dark caves in the Paleolithic times. I think, like sex, images are a fundamental part of human life, and I believe they are deeply tied to our very existence and survival and to our evolution. But one thing about this idea that I've just talked about of the camera giving you the feeling that the images exist out there in the world to be taken like ripe fruit, looking for the perfect one, the perfect moment, I don't think actually, in my experience, that that's really completely accurate. It's a bit misleading. The video camera is a special, very special kind of camera. And one of the most important things that it does is it captures the spontaneous flow of events, the stream, the images that continuously unfold and transform in the life stream, the time flow. I don't know of any other camera really that does that. Cinema, of course, does it, as Chris mentioned in his talk. And I think that is a combination of cinema leading into video and now into the digital age is truly unique. It's unprecedented in human history. And the camera does another thing that, I have this love-hate relationship with my camera. Sometimes I love it very deeply. Other times I hate it What it does, you think of it as a window to the world, traveling, you shoot videos, you bring it back, you share it with your friends. It seems like they're there looking with you. But when you really think about what it is, it's actually a limiting device. It limits down experience. It narrows the field of view, the focus. If you're shooting here, you can't see what's over there. That is the political danger of this medium. This narrowing of focus. At the same time, it heightens experience. It creates images at the moment they are occurring, while they're happening. The images are being created. So in terms of art making, what it does actually is takes out of the situation the need to render the images by hand, which takes time. So now the artists are able to use a device which captures the images while they're unfolding. And it frees the maker of those images to be at the same time the observer of the world going by and the participant at the same moment. And you've felt that a lot when you shoot with this medium of video. You're inside and outside at the same time. And this other side of images that I was talking about with the camera, I think it's deeply connected with that unique position it puts you into. And when I would go out into the world in the days that I was doing a lot of landscape work, looking for that right place, right moment, I would always find that it wasn't just any moment, that I knew and I could feel even before it came, just at the beginning of the image coming. I'd be walking through the landscape looking for the place to shoot, and I could feel it before I actually got there. And I can't tell you what that feeling is, where that comes from, but I knew it. It was like electricity. It was like a magnetic point. And then I would get to the place, and I would literally feel and see the landscape aligning itself, just so. And that was the place where the image was. And I felt every time that I knew it before I got there. Because when I arrived, being there physically, it became like an inner confirmation or a déjà vu that I had seen this image somewhere before. Some form of it, some idea of it. I don't know what it was. So this kind of process of matching the inner image with the outer image and having the two line up, that's very fundamental in this medium. Now, let me just tell you another quick thing before I show you another video. And that is the side of images that I think concern us greatly and I think is at the heart of this series of lectures. And that is the image world that we inhabit today in the 21st century. Here's a quote from Jalal al-Din Rumi. He's one of the greatest poets of mankind. He was alive in Persia in the 13th century. And here's what he said. The images we invent could change into wild beasts and tear us to pieces. Could change into wild beasts and tear us to pieces. So, these are dangerous. There's a danger there in images. And why? Because what happens when you make an image, and video is the master of this, takes an image from here, puts it back into the time flow now. So this process of taking an image, making an image, and having it continue to exist in other times has been greatly amplified by media today, to the point where our world is inhabited by so many images, so many pictures, from so many different times and places, all simultaneously spinning around us. And so we say that we are inundated, assaulted, bombarded, battered, flooded, besieged, deluged with images. Those are the words people use. Listen to those words. Those are words that describe warfare and natural disasters. They have a sense of danger to them, of a threat. Why are people saying that? Our world is filled with all these chattering voices, trying to grab our attention, invading every corner of our lives, every corner of our lives now. These things are coming in. And in this day and age, if you told someone, even 100 years ago, that one of the most lucrative and profitable businesses in the world at the turn of the millennium would be the sale of people's attention, they would say you're crazy. They couldn't even imagine that. When you sit down to watch television, your attention has a dollar value put on it, depending on the program that you're seeing. It is for sale, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in this world, selling your attention. For what? Of course, primarily for motivating you, using images to motivate you to go and act, to buy, to believe a certain set of ideas. It's an extraordinary situation, unprecedented. The professionals that produce these images are very, very good. And I think sometimes maybe that it's the 30-second television spot which will survive into the future and be shown in museums in 500 years. I mean, they are some of the most dense and expertly crafted moving image sequences in the world. Of course, not talking about the content. When I do big pieces like I showed you, I work with some of those same technicians, cameramen, lighting men, sound men, people who create those same images. And I have a lot of respect for them. Some of them are quite good. I think of the people that creating this image world we live in the middle of, like a swirling tornado. I think of them like chefs. Some of them are very, very skilled, making the finest, most exquisitely tasteful food you have ever had. Some of them are not so skilled, they just make junk. But all of them are similar in the sense that they're working on the moment of taste. The moment when the image comes into your eye, the moment of perception. You know, the Greek word for aesthetics comes out of visual perception and taste. The Indian system, the Hindu system of rasa, which is so essential to art, the rules of art making, also means taste. But these people really have no knowledge and really deep understanding of the most essential point about eating, and that is what happens when the food goes into your body. What happens when you digest it? What happens, where is this thing called nutrition? We have great food, tastes wonderful, doesn't do a thing for your body, for your soul. These images sit there and affect us in ways we can't even imagine. That's really the place where they really live. Here's Rilke talking about this as a poet. He says, "For only when they have changed into our very blood, into glance and gesture, and are nameless, no longer to be distinguished from ourselves, only then can it happen that in some very rare hour, the first word of a poem arises in their midst and goes forth from them." So the image must be absorbed into your body. That is essential. It must be absorbed into your body. So which images you choose to take in, that's very important. That's one of our most important decisions today. Because we still have the power to turn it off, to not look, and certainly the power to analyze and think. That's extremely important. Here's the Vimalakirti Sutra, one of the greatest Buddhist sutras in the Tibetan tradition. Reality is perceived by your whole body. Your whole body. That's what Chris was talking about, the sense of the body. being introduced into cinema, into the image. That's what installation work is. You're inside the image. Your body is inside the image. Here is Victor Stoichita, who's wrote a great book on visionary painting in Spain in the Golden Age in the 17th century. He said, visionary ecstasy is the experiencing of an image that takes over the body of the seer. The experiencing of an image that takes over the body of the seer. There are images living with us right now. This room is filled with images. I wish I could see them all. It's extraordinary how many images are in this room right now. So for me, really, it's not the museum where the images live. It's here. That's where they can do harm, but that's where they can also elevate us. So let me show you another video work. This one is called Silent Mountain. It was created in 2001. And Chris mentioned that I've been working with old master painting, and I was very inspired in the late 90s by the arrival of these small flat panel screens. I think there's a whole other tradition going beyond the cinema now, with the ability for artists to make images the size of this piece of paper and a little bit thicker, about the size of a book, with these laptop computer screens. So the whole tradition of panel painting, which we know from the Renaissance, is now coming back in a very interesting way. This piece was made for 2 large plasma screens side by side. I'm going to show it to you as a video on one screen, so you won't get a sense of it as an object, but you'll get the idea. It's called Silent Mountain. So could we play that, please? And this one is silent. So that was Silent Mountain. It's hot, isn't it? So that's when I made that work, I was thinking about the way I approached it was through writing. Most of the works I've made, I actually write out first. I don't draw pictures. I usually write some kind of text. And I find that writing is actually a much better way for me to conceptualize these kinds of works, because the written word is a kind of time flow. It's a describing of a series of events in sequence. And I find pictures, when I write them, to be very static. So I saw this as a kind of sculpture in time. I saw this event with these people, which started out, I didn't show you the very beginning part, but it just starts in a very quiet, normal way. Nothing's going on for a while. And then slowly this feeling comes. And it builds and builds and builds and peaks in this kind of explosion, this big spike. And then it comes down again. But the aftermath is not at all like what happened at the beginning. It's the same when you throw a stone in the pond. And even if it was moving a little bit before you throw it in, the kind of movement that happens later is very, very different. The surface is completely transformed. Like also when a boat goes through the water. And that's what I felt seeing these people and working with them. That idea of this disturbed surface. And the actual, the form of a spike or an explosion, that's one of the fundamental forms of nature. The idea of a volcano going off, or someone going into a blind rage. My father had an incredible temper. He would just explode, and everybody ducked. Or you can think of an orgasm, or a flash of insight, that point of inspiration I talked about, or even sudden death without warning. That's all part of nature. Those forms come to us from nature. And I thought of also this idea of Aristotle's model of the dramatic narrative, because in a way this piece, as Chris said, and that was really good when he said that the works all have narrative to them. This is a narrative. It has a beginning and a middle, a crisis, and a resolution and an end. But it doesn't have any story or plot. In it. We don't know why those people were feeling that. We don't know what their story is. We don't know what made them explode and want to scream as loud as they could. So I began to see things like Aristotle's narrative form as just simply another kind of wave shape from nature. And that is a very fundamental shape of nature, the wave that peaks. I began to think, well, what other kinds of wave shapes are out there? And what other kinds of energy forms, flowing energy forms, could I work with? And so all of my works, I think at their core, have a very clear, at least to my mind, a very clear time form. And I find actually that it is the art historians who very often miss this aspect of the work. I was a musician. I worked for many years with David Tudor, who was the pianist with John Cage. And I learned a lot from my experience with music in the sense of making time become a physical material. You could feel the shape of it. It got very, very precise, very detailed. Each song had its own unique time form. And if someone's trained visually, looking at paintings and images in a traditional way, you miss that time form. But it has always been there. It is there. I see it all the time when I go to museums like the Alta Pinakothek and look at the old masters. You can see them trying to touch time. And I found this wonderful quote from Cézanne. Of course, this was in the late 19th century when the whole idea of time was about to explode into the world in the form of cinema, the moving image. And in the years before that, Cézanne, who was going again out into the world at the foot of Mount Sainte-Victoire, looking for the perfect place to make a painting, to make an image. And he said to someone once, he said, right now there is a moment of time passing by, and we must become that moment. We must become that moment. That's what was being squeezed and forced out on the canvas. To catch it before it went away. Not just to catch it, but to become it. To become the time itself. Now this work also was created within the last 3 years, when I've started to work more specifically with human emotion, with actors, with performers, with time as it manifests itself in the human body. And I think we all know how human beings are an endless source of fascination. You can sit in a cafe all day long or at an airport, and you can just watch humanity go by, and it is endless and infinite and truly profound. And so while I was at the Getty Research Institute in 1998, I was invited there as an artist, along with a whole group of scholars and art historians, to discuss and study the idea of representing the passions. How do you represent these extreme emotional states which come onto us without warning and seemingly uncontrollable? How do you represent them when the nature of representing something is the nature of stepping back from it and in a way controlling it? So it's quite an interesting year that we had. And I became very interested at that time, renewed interest in historical painting. I began to look at crying Madonnas, depositions, these people in the throes of agonizing, overwhelming emotion, and particularly small devotional art. The panels I talked about before, you know, the size of your laptop computer screen, it's just about the same size as of many of these portable devotional shrines that were created starting in the 15th century, that people would take 2 images together on wood panels, fold them up and latch them and take them on the road, just like a businessman going on the road and plugging into the internet when he gets into the hotel. They'd open it up at night in the inn and say their prayers to it and go to bed. That was really fascinating, and society was becoming mobile in ways that it had never been before. So people needed to take these images with them on the road, very similar to today. At the same time I was there were certain events happening in my personal life. My father, who was 83 years old, had become ill, and all throughout the year I was at the Getty looking at these artworks, he was slowly dying, going down and down, very slowly, over the course of what ended up to be a little bit more than a year. So I had this, on the one hand, this incredible intellectual experience, analyzing, studying, discussing these works of art. And on the other hand, I was living the content. I was living the content of those works. And this deep emotion arose in me in that kind of personal crisis. Without warning, the emotions would just burst into me, suddenly and unexpectedly. And I realized in a way at a certain point that this was not sentimentality, because in art school I was taught at all costs to avoid anything to do with sentimentality. So emotions were basically something we didn't really go to, we didn't touch. And here in my own life, the very thing I was taught to avoid in art school was just taking me over in this year. And so as an artist, I felt that I really needed to understand that more deeply, because it was something much more mysterious and much deeper than I realized. And the turning point for me, and one of the most important moments of my life, I think, was when I was at the Art Institute of Chicago that year in 1998. And I was walking through the galleries of 15th century painting, which had become my just almost obsessive focus. And there was a small crying Madonna by a Flemish artist by the name of Gerrit Bouts, painted in about 1450, with the sort of hyper-realistic style of the northern painters. The painters of the Northern Renaissance, like Dürer here, we have such great examples. In the German art scene, you go further north, you have Rogier van der Weyden, Van Eyck, really got hold of the highest quality image-making technology on the planet. No one had ever been able to master light and shadow and form in that way before. And I think that those images rival the best images we can produce today, where you see a reflection on every little pearl on the woman's dress. So here was this hyper-real, high-resolution image of the crying Madonna with red eyes. And I was there to look at the galleries because my exhibition was going to travel to that museum. And I was standing there looking at her, and I just started weeping. And that really had never happened before quite in that way. Uncontrollably, just spontaneously, I just started crying. And it was in a weekday morning. I was more or less alone in the galleries, kind of looked around, made sure no one was looking. And I realized what happened was that a kind of feedback loop had been created, a kind of mirror. There I was crying, and there she was crying, from the 15th century to the late 20th century, both of us crying. It was one of the most profound moments of my life because it didn't have to do with any of the kinds of things that I was taught and trained to think about when I thought about the relationship we have with a work of art and how you approach a work of art and how you understand a work of art. I felt at that moment I was using a work of art. And so I created, there's an exhibition that I had that was curated by John Walsh at the Getty Museum. It opened last spring. It consists of a group of these panel pieces plus a large installation that Chris mentioned, the Five Angels. And it's actually coming here to Munich next spring at the Alte Pinakothek and the Moderne Pinakothek. So I'll be looking forward very much to coming back, to come back to Munich and to show my work and continue meeting people here. So I'm going to show you one of the works from this show. It's actually a piece that hasn't really been shown yet. It's been shown in the Getty for the first time last January when it opened. And it was actually, I created it based on a painting in the collection of the Alte Pinakothek here in Munich. It's the Dürer painting of the Four Apostles. It's an extraordinary image, very narrow frames. These four men confined in this extraordinary space, painted with amazing detail and clarity and color. And one of them is looking out towards us, another one's absorbed in a book. It's a very, very moving work and a very extraordinary work. So I was inspired by that image, not the content, the image. And I created this work thinking a lot about my father and the experience of that loss. It's called Observance, and it's shown on one large plasma screen. Again, we're going to see it as a projection here. And it has, like the last piece, it has no sound. So let's look at the last half of the work Observance. So can we play that, please? Okay, that was observance. And after working for a long time, I'd say most of my life actually, on moments of solitary experience, on the focal point of ourselves, our individual existence, what happens when we confront something alone. It's why I'm drawn to the mystics, the saints and mystics like St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, who embody those moments, those rarefied moments of life. And even the two people in Silent Mountain were separated from each other. This is the first piece I made in a way that dealt with the group in a very intimate way. And in fact, was only made possible by the connections between the people in this group. When we worked on this piece, it took several weeks to plan it and put it together, and a week of very intensive work. I found that I started working with each of those performers individually, and very soon I realized I had to step back and address them as a group, that they had to be together as a group. And I really believe very strongly that the real power of human beings is collective energy. What we can do together is extraordinary. Even though some of the origin of some of the ideas that change the world come through the heart and soul and mind of an individual, in the end, it's the collective energy that makes that possible. At the same time, when we lose someone who's dear to us, it's the collective energy that really makes our life possible at that point, to go on. And so we had really quite an extraordinary experience working together and keeping the group together. And people were able to do things in the context of this group, this protected zone, that they could never have done on their own. It extended even to the technicians who were there in the room, the cameraman, the lighting man, all of us in the room, Kira in the room with me, as she always is. We all felt it. It became like a transmission of feeling through everyone who worked on that project. And that really taught me a lot, because when you're trained as a contemporary artist in today's world, you're trained to go on it alone. You're trained to go one-on-one with the work. The most important thing is the work, right? There it is, the blank canvas, and you. Close the door, close the windows, one-on-one. And I've learned so much about collaboration and joint creativity by working with these, on these big film shoots that I've been doing with a whole team of technical people. And everybody, if it works well, everybody has the same mindset. They're connected in a very deep way. The other thing about this piece, I think it has a lot to do with, very simple things. This is not the things, usually don't see this on television. This happens in a somewhat of a protected place when people are like this. And right after I shot this piece, my family and I went to New Mexico, and we visited Bandelier National Monument, which is a Pueblo Indian dwelling, a village from 1,100 years ago. It's empty, it's abandoned. It's a national park now. And we were walking through the ruins, and you could feel the presence of these people. It's a beautiful, idyllic valley. Trees hanging over the stream that runs through the center of it, and all of the dwellings built up on the sides of the cliffs. And down below, the common area where they all shared and they ground corn, and birds singing in the trees. You could really feel the presence of these people. It was very, very strong. You could hear the kids playing and the women talking and someone chopping wood, except they were all gone. And while we were there, we came across a collection of poems, basically songs from these people. And one of them I'd like to share with you now. It's one of the most moving things I've read about the simple fact of human existence, that is, that the wheel has to keep turning. It keeps turning over. The old leave us and the young arrive in a continuous movement. Even if there's no big natural disaster or a big war or some great horrible tragedy, like there is so many times in the world, that wheel keeps turning, even in peaceful times. And this is about a very simple, happy time, actually. So here it is. It's called The Willows by the Waterside. We first read this in the place where these people lived. My little breath, under the willows by the waterside we used to sit, and there the yellow cottonwood bird came and sang. That I remember, and therefore I weep. Under the growing corn we used to sit, and there the little leaf bird came and sang. That I remember, and therefore I weep. There on the meadow of yellow flowers we used to walk. Oh, my little breath, my little heart. There on the meadow of blue flowers we used to walk. Ah, how long ago that we two walked in that pleasant way. Then everything was happy. But ah, how long ago. There on the meadow of red flowers we used to walk. Oh, my little breath, now I go there alone in sorrow. So sensing the presence of absence and realizing that when you visit churches, places like churches and temples, the most striking thing about them is that they're empty. And they're empty for a reason. The emptiness is at the center of who we are. The images that are invisible are the ones that mean the most to us. And I used to think for many years, using video, that I was working with a visual medium and that I was a visual artist. But I've come to realize that, in fact, video more than anything has showed me invisible things. And I think of the great, great art historian of the 20th century, who's unfortunately not nearly well known enough as he should be. He's a Sri Lankan man, Hindu. His name is Kumaraswamy. And he said that despite the term visual art, all works of art represent invisible things. So how does video represent invisible things? Just take a picture, take an image, and it's gone. The thing that you're looking at is gone. I have my parents on video, my mother and my father. I've actually used some of them in my work. They're gone. And so this invisible world which surrounds us, this invisible web of connections, and even if it's not people are gone, again, in this room right now, there is an amazing root structure that goes out through all of you to people and places and times and histories and cultures that I don't even see and I cannot understand, I can't touch. And it is the reality of this room. That's why digital technology represents one of the greatest innovations in human history. Because for the first time, we are given tools, an artistic medium that can represent that invisible root structure. Think of the internet. Think of the layers of memory in your computer. Think of the code, the human code. It is not coincidental that in the time when the human body is being translated as a code, and the intrinsic reality of a body is being expressed as a code, that this thing called the computer exists, that we are using today. It is the space underneath the image. I see a whole generation of people emerging who not only have a mistrust in the visual image, which is part of what's going on today and part of the great disturbances going on in the world today, is the visual surface is not telling the truth, right? Not at all. So not only is there a growing mistrust of the visual image, but there is a whole generation of people coming into the world who realize that the visual image is inadequate. It is not enough to represent the true reality that exists before us. It's not. Why? Because it doesn't show us the invisible things. It doesn't show us the connections. When painters like Giotto in the 14th century, the first artists to understand space and light, to begin to paint space and light that began to approach somewhat of a representation of the world in the way that we see, their biggest discovery was that light was invisible. And light is invisible. Light is invisible. The painters realized that. How is it invisible? Right now, this room is filled with light. The space between me and you is filled with light. You want to see it? Here it is. I'll hold this out. See the light on the paper? There's light over here. You only see light when it's reflected, when it hits something. I saw an experiment when I was in university where they took a black box, dark box, with a hole here and a hole here, and they sent a beam of light through that box. And it passed through and went out the other side through the hole, and you looked in the little window and it was dark. You couldn't see it. So the painters recognized that the piazza was filled with light that they were painting, and that for them was the confirmation of the existence of the divine presence. The presence that exists everywhere that you can't see and you can't touch. That's what they saw, and that's what they realized. And of course, time itself is invisible. That's the greatest part of the invisible world. So we live in an invisible world, and we're just beginning now to understand it in a new way, thanks to this new digital media. So I'd like to close by showing you just two more things. The first one is a work that I recorded in 1989 and in 1991. And it was originally part of a triptych. I'm going to show you the two outer panels. I've put them together in this special kind of tape that I made. So, and it has to do with the birth of our first child, Blake, which was an amazing experience for both Kira and I, and also, most dramatically, the passing of my mother, who died in 1991, the day after our son Blake's third birthday. So we had the birthday celebration in the evening. My brother and I went to the hospital. She passed away in the middle of the night. And I made this piece called Nantes Triptych. So I'm going to show you the two panels side by side. And that really, for me, that experience was the first time I felt I really met life head on. There was no protection, nothing in between me and life itself, or the loss of life. It was the most difficult, unacceptable, terrifying image I've ever seen, to see my mother slipping away. And in the 3 months that she was in the hospital, we couldn't talk to her at all. She was gone, pretty much. And I decided, as a kind of a moment of desperation, that I needed to record that with my video camera, the thing I refused to see, really. And I asked my father and my sister and my brother if I could do that. They said it was okay. So I shot the last images of her life before she died, the day before she died. And then at the same time that year, I really felt strongly from the experience that Kira and I had during the birth of our child that I really needed to record a human birth of a baby. So through a friend, I was able to arrange to do that, someone who wanted their birth videoed. So let me share this with you now. This is not triptych, the two end panels put together. Okay, can we show the tape, please? Turn out the lights.
Push it out towards me, towards me. That's the way. More than that. More than that. Keep coming, keep coming. Don't arch your back around it. Push your bottom towards me. Yes, yes. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that. That's the way. That's the way. Slow. Let it ease out, let it ease out. Slow. Okay, good. Push again. That's the way. Push again. Here we go. Push again. Here it comes. Okay, come on, push again. There we go. Nice big hard push, Beth. Here's your baby. Oops, hold on. Yeah. There's your baby. Hi, gorgeous. Oh, you're perfect. You're so beautiful. Hi, honey. Yes. Oh, she's very beautiful. Baby. She's fine. Oh. Yeah. There she is. Got lots and lots of vernix. Oh my goodness sakes. I think we could use another check here.
Yeah, I think so.
Baby. Let me get one. It's right here. It's okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Look at that baby. You want to cut the cord down? Sorry, Anna, this doesn't feel good. I just want to make sure it's staying nice and firm, and it's staying really nice and firm. Hi, baby. You're getting pretty pink, aren't you?
Really great.
Take it off. Yeah. She's getting really pink. She looks like a little rosebud.
Here, wipe it up on those.
There you go. Look at that gorgeous girl. My goodness sakes. There you go, honey. Try to do this without squirting anybody, but I don't make any promises. I'm very messy when it comes to slippery things.
Laura, could you look in that suitcase and see if she's got any more baby blankets?
Did you pack baby blankets? Look, the babies were right there. I don't think we have any tears or anything to repair. I think you did perfect. Such a baby girl. Here? Yeah, that's a nice placenta. Yeah. What's your blood type, Bethany?
Oh, positive.
Okay. You should get a cord blood then if you have a red top tube for me.
Yeah, I've got it over here.
sure it's staying nice and firm, and it's staying really nice and firm. Oh, you're getting pretty pink, aren't you? Take it off. It's getting really pink. Looks like a little rose.
Here, wipe it up on those.
There you go. Look at that gorgeous girl. My goodness sakes. There you go. There you go, honey. Gotta do this without squirting anybody, but I don't make any promises. I'm very messy when it comes to slippery things. Look, the babies were right there. You're not bleeding at all, so you're doing great as far as I can. I don't think we have any tears or anything to repair. You did perfect. Such a cutie girl. Yeah.
There's a moment in that piece where the baby opens its eyes for the first time. The camera comes in and you see the dying face and the birth face together, and the baby's eyes open. And that probably was the greatest gift I've ever experienced in all of my work with video, because when the eyes opened, the black inside the eyes was the deepest black I have ever seen in my life. Because when a baby is born, the eyes are completely open, dilated, so it's only the black part of the eye. So you see the first light come into the eye. On the other side, the last light is leaving. And then the baby just blinks once, and there's no life in the eyes at that moment, because it's all inside, in a dark place. And then the eyes blink once and open, and there's the life spark right there. You see it in one blink. Empty eyes, blink, life force coming out of the eyes. That's why there's so much talking in ancient philosophy and writings about the eyes transmitting light, transmitting an image to us when you look at someone else. If anyone has ever been in the room with the dying, as my brother and I were, he was in the video there a little bit, then you'll know that time as we know it completely changes. It becomes a vast sea or an infinite expanse, and yet at the same time it's microscopic. It's like nothing I've ever experienced in my life. So you become so focused so that a little drop of saliva on the mouth, or a change of temperature of 1/10 of a degree, or a flicker of eyelids becomes the most important event in the whole room. And the objects and events around become charged. The sound of a bird out the window, or children playing outside, or the clock by the bedside, everything becomes changed and transformed. And your emotions completely circulate and just tumble over one another. Sudden tears, and anger, and fear, and then strength and resolve. And then the next moment you find yourself laughing over some silly story with your brother or your family members. And then the most extraordinary miracle of all, which is the last breath, which I was fortunate to witness both with my mother and my father. And that is, of course, when the soul leaves. You can see why people believe that, the last breath. The Greeks called it pneuma. which is the breath was carrying the life force, the life energy of a person, was carried on the breath. In Sanskrit, there's the term prana, which in its derivation, in its origin, means breath, is connected to the idea of breath and also to the idea of wisdom and knowledge, the life force. They're all connected. When my son Blake was born, that was a completely different but equally profound experience. That's when I truly understood the power of the woman. The woman's power comes right from nature, like a great storm. It's the same energy. Seeing Kira pushing the baby out, I don't know where the strength and power came from for that event. And when he came out head first, I saw the oldest man I had ever seen in my life. His head and face right between Kira's legs, framed. A little old man, all wrinkled, dark, like the wisest person I'd ever seen. And then when he came out and I held him, his little heartbeat, human heart goes twice as fast for a baby as it does for us. So it's like a little hummingbird, very fast. And you see him, his breathing, and you realize, became frightened. I thought, he could stop breathing. He could die, and I kept looking at him saying, come on, it's okay. He seemed so fragile. And I realized at that moment that a birth and death are created at the same moment. They're not the beginning and the end. They coexist. Birth and death exist in this room at this moment, in each and every one of us. These are the two sides of life that we live with. The known, everyone in this room was born at a certain time, in a certain place, in a certain year. That is a fact. No one in this room can know how they will leave this earth. That is the unknown, the mystery. And we as human beings live between that mystery of the unknown, which drives us forward, and the knowledge of the past, the certainty of the past, which grounds us in life. And so I want to close now with the last piece, which comes from the large installation called 5 Angels from the Millennium, for the Millennium. It's a series of recordings of a man falling in the water. When I was 6 years old, I fell into a lake when we were on holiday and I almost drowned. I went right to the bottom. And I saw the most beautiful, fantastic image I had ever seen in my life. It was like paradise. Light coming through, green and blue, plants moving. It was a place I never wanted to leave. And then my uncle, luckily, dove in and grabbed me. And it was like some kind of interruption. I was very angry. And then, of course, after he took me out of the water, I became very frightened and I cried and I got all upset. But for a moment, there was an image I'll never forget of absolute paradise. And so I've been working with water and bodies ever since. And this piece is the latest one. It's a series of images of a man falling in the water. But what happens is, if you just do something very simple, like if you turn the camera upside down, an image of someone drowning, of a death, becomes an image of birth. If you make the time in the video run backwards, an image of a man falling in the water and drowning becomes birth. So death turns into birth depending on how you look at it. And the image I'm going to show you is the action in reverse. So this is called the Departing Angel. It's from the series, The 5 Angels for the Millennium. So can we show that, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to have a discussion, right? A little time. Sorry if it was too long.
Bitte sehr. Bitte? Die erste Frage. Bitte sehr.
It's a very important question. I want to know. Wonderful. I want to know your feeling for reality.
Did you say for reality?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your feeling for reality, and I can explain how I put it together with a personal story, a very fresh experience I had in this year. I'm ill from multiple sclerosis, and in January and February I was in India, in Kerala. I met an Ayurvedic doctor. He brought to me back feelings I lost 15 years ago, within 6 days. This Ayurvedic doctor told me, when he is working with me, he built a hospital in Kuwait, and he told me he knows in next 20 years in Kuwait it will be 60 degrees. Yes, the question is about, the question is, what's your feeling for reality? Because when it is a tragedy, what I felt in this moment, you know, I felt, I got a feeling back I lost 15 years ago. The same time, this doctor told me, this world will die soon about this big climate catastrophe. My feeling inside,
Okay. So
my feeling inside, it was a big tragedy, and I think I never want to be filmed in this situation. Yes?
Okay. I don't know if I understood exactly, but you're asking about reality and the edge of life, and I think that human emotions, for me, are the key. They're not simply temporary, transitory phenomenon that come and go, but the human emotions are the real way to go into the deepest knowledge that we have as human beings, because all of the terrible atrocities that were committed throughout history were committed by people who did not feel their own heart, who did not know how to cry, who had an intellect that was completely out of control, imbalanced. And your Ayurvedic teacher and that system of medicine is based on balance in the body, as you know, and achieving the right balance. And in this time right now, we have a very great problem with imbalance. The world is out of balance. And unless the voices of artists, the voices of all of us that come from the heart, not from the intellect, if those voices are not heard, then I think the world will get worse, not better.
But Bill, there was another side to the question, I think, that is, I do not want to be filmed in pain.
Right.
And when you look at your work, you see from the very beginning on a lot of images which are dealing with grief, which are dealing with pain, which are often at the verge of hysteria. And the lady says, I do not want to be filmed in pain. So what is your... No?
Right.
Okay. So
they don't do anything.
We cannot. We. Okay. So your question is clear, I think. What is your sense, your take on reality?
Well, the material world exists in front of us as a kind of screen, as a kind of blockage. There's an Islamic philosopher by the name of Suhrawardi from the 13th century who talked about how the material objects that surround us actually block the light, not the light, but the inner light from coming through. And only when you can see through the surface, through the objects, through the material, to the inner light can you really experience the world. We happen to live in a very materialistic culture. I say we, I mean Germany, I mean Western Europe, I mean America, the industrialized world. We have made our civilization based on taking the material of Mother Earth out of the ground violently, reforming this material in our image. And that's why you have to discuss the environmental crisis that exists today, which is a big reason why the Earth is out of balance. The hot weather we're having in this time now is a living proof of how out of balance the world is. And you have to take that and understand it not only as a technological crisis, but as a spiritual crisis at the same time.
Second question.
But we can talk later, okay? We talk after.
I'm working about a question how we come to our experience, how our experience is constituted. And I think experience is constituted by the images who are important for us. My question is, you said we all create images, and you told about images you seen as a child, and I want to know what's the difference, or how can you describe the difference of making an image of how children make an image, and what's the way you as an artist make the images?
Well, I think the big issue that you raise is an important one that's been discussed in many different ways. But it's the fact that as children, we're fearless with images. I mean, images come through us and we put them on paper. We paint them, we sculpt them with clay, we do anything. There's no difference between the inner world and outer world is not so stratified yet. And so this kind of beauty of the child, which has been compared to the artist's mind so many times, it's a little naive to my taste, but it's still, there's a grain of truth there. That artists are people who have not lost that kind of filtering process that the most of us have. As Van Gogh said, in every man there is a poet who died young, who the man survived. And on the other hand, what recent history has told us also, and I read that quote about images turning into wild beasts, you can't just bring any image into the world. I mean, there's a responsibility with every image that's brought into the world. And artists, especially in the 20th century with art movements like surrealism, really, to my mind, were examples of the opening of the unconscious, which people like Freud and Jung achieved in the early 20th century. And with that opening, there was this sort of unleashed a kind of flood of inner images which had been bottled up, had been held up. And the difference between those images that come out from within and images that come out in the context of traditional cultures, such as Hindu culture or Tibetan Buddhist culture, is those long, continuously evolving cultures have learned how to channel those images that are continuously coming up into a way that's beneficial for the group and becomes a true teaching for the group and for the tradition. And by that I don't mean they only pick the nice images. I mean, you just have to look at Tibetan Buddhism to see some really violent, terrifying images which represent our inner desires and self. So I think that's a very important issue today in the world when we have these machines, this technology that all day long can just generate images over and over and just thousands, millions of images coming at us all the time. It's not a question of do we want these images or should these images be made? It's a question of how should those images be channeled and used, and what is our relationship to those images?
Is that also a possible answer to the question I tried to pose earlier, that your images are showing a lot of images of pain, your early performances, you're actually hurting yourself, they show grief, and they are, I would say, almost every time at the verge of hysteria, and you were quoting two mystics. I mean, the mystics and the hysteria is of course very close. So you say we have to feed these machines exactly because they are these high drive technological machines with these very, I would say, dangerous images in order to get for ourselves a kind of solution?
Well, no, not exactly. I don't think we need to, I mean, we see plenty of these images on television. And the funny thing is, when I started to get interested in old master painting, and I went to places like the Alte Pinakothek, I saw images just as horrible as the kind of images I see in graphic TV news.
But why is that?
I think that people understand life by approaching as close as possible to the edge of life, to the place where you fall off. And we have always had that kind of instinctual desire to come as close as possible to that edge, whether it's in prehistoric times, a hunting party going out and almost getting killed by the saber-toothed tiger, or young men coming back from war. There is a kind of knowledge there, and I saw, when 9/11 happened in New York, I saw this deep knowledge for a short period of time after that horrible event. There was actually clarity in the world, clarity in the social structure, how people related to each other, how they understood themselves. Acts of kindness between complete strangers happening all the time.
So there is no correlation between the development of technique, the rapid development of technique, and the harsher, the more dangerous, the more painful these images get. Because if you look at the Japanese technological industry, you see what the kids and the animation filmmakers are feeding. These images get more dangerous.
Yeah, they
and
do.
I would say that your images get more and more also, I would say, hysterical.
Well, I don't know if I'd call it hysterical, but I think we are in a dangerous time. I think what you're alluding to is the need for more and more stimulation. I mean, if I touch you like this, and I keep doing that, eventually you won't feel that anymore. There's a very famous experiment done in the late 1960s by a guy named Tom Cornsweet, perceptual researcher in a university in America. And believe it or not, he put a tiny projector on a contact lens on someone's eye and projected a letter onto their retina on the back of their eye. And because it was fixed at one point and the eye, is moving all the time, the longest someone could see the letter was 10 seconds before it disappeared. And the reason why, the stimulation was continuous. So I think in this drive to sort of reach people and get their attention, we've kind of gone up, more and more stimulation. And in an ironic way, when something is still and silent, it can actually catch your attention almost more today. And I think that's what you're talking about, and that's dangerous. I wouldn't consider my images to be part of that process, however. I don't think of them in that way, and I don't approach my image making in that way. I'm not interested in grabbing people's attention and delivering a message and in shocking them. These are facts of life that come on these screens. I mean, the image of the second to last piece we saw, which is very difficult, it brings a lot of emotions out. Some people get very angry, and there's all sorts of reactions, is a fact of life. I mean, that's an image.
Did you ever think about showing these images at a normal speed instead of slowing them down?
Well, of course, I've seen them all in the normal speed, and I find that slow motion is a very interesting process. What it does is, the only time we can experience what the psychologists call time dilation is in ourselves, with the mind. And of course, people who undergo serious training of the body with yoga and so on can actually expand and contract time, because there's this subjective aspect to time. When you slow an image down mechanically with this technology, what you're actually doing is you're actually taking an event which happens, we're all locked into one speed. That's what I think is really interesting. And you take that event and artificially you slow it down. But what you're not affecting is you're not slowing down time. That's a kind of a misunderstanding. It's confusion of language. The same way photography does not stop time. The beautiful thing about photography is you take a picture, time keeps going. So the picture you have of your mother, who's no longer here, 30 years later, this is a really incredibly powerful image which has changed and transformed over time because time keeps going. And so if you shoot an image with video cameras we've both done and slowed it down as we've both done, you're actually allowing your conscious awareness, the part of your mind and being that is aware of what's going on, you're allowing that to catch up with the action, which is happening too fast in the normal speed. So whereas something becomes instinctual, like if I throw this at you, you go like this without thinking, there's no thinking. All of a sudden, if it's slowed down and now it's coming towards you, you're aware of the whole thing. You're conscious of that whole event, which was normally instinctual and relatively primitive in terms of neural processing. So that's what happens where you're actually shifting consciousness when you work with slow motion.
Your last question. Bitte?
Hört man mich? Ja, okay. I found it very, very interesting that you are talking about two kinds of experience, two kinds of artistic experience, two kinds of making art. At the beginning you are talking about making art in a lone situation, being alone with the object, like the mystics, like Rumi, like St. John of the Cross. And then at the end you were talking about this collective experience together with the actors. And there has been must be a tremendous change in your kind of working. What happened there?
Well, I think it's a good question. I realized when I started that work, and I have to say, including the work I did, like the Silent Mountain, where there's just the actors alone, I had to learn how to work with other people. Not just, I mean, I've done that all my life. When you need help doing something and you involve someone who has certain skills and you work with them, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, in the case of the performers, when they're on that screen, the majority of the piece rests in their hands. The success of the work is not in my hands as the artist. I mean, it is in a way because I can direct them and work with them, and I had to learn how to do that. And nothing in my art training prepared me for that. I didn't go to film school. I knew nothing about directing a movie or any kind of performance. So I had to learn. I was so nervous at the beginning when I was working with these people. I can't tell you. I would wake up in the morning when we were going to shoot, and my stomach would be like a knot, because I say, how can I tell them what's in my mind? You know, how could I know what I want to do, but how can I communicate that to them? How can I kind of put that image in their minds as well? So it was very difficult to do. But in the end, I think it did connect me in a funny way to Renaissance art too, because Raphael and people like that had huge studios with lots of collaborators. It was a very collaborative art form. It was actually a lot closer to movie making than painting and art is today for us. Much more close to the filmmakers, the big movie makers, in terms of how it was created. And I think, again, you go back to music, which is a collaborative art. It's not necessarily normal in human history that we've reached a point at this time that visual art is a solo kind of experience, a solo skill, a solo way of working. That's not necessarily been normal in human history. And I think with these tools now, if you notice in media art and digital art today, a lot of collaboration going on. It's really interesting what's going on now. People are like starting to send images back and forth across the web, connecting and changing and sending things back and making these kind of collaborative type pieces, you know, and I think these tools are allowing us to work with images more like with music, in a similar way to music. I think we'll see more of that.
You were asking 3 questions. I'm allowed to ask my third question. My third question, then it's finished. What strikes me, Viola, is that your work gets analyzed in very different ways. You have the French school, and they are talking in a structural way about how you occupy a new kind of cinema. There is an American school who is more interested in the kind of collective experiences you are offering us. And there is even, I would say, a beautiful book came out in Germany, herausgegeben by Prester Verlag, edited by Rolf Lauter, which is dealing more into the kind of iconographical issues. Is there at some point, or has there been at some point, a moment in time that you said, I prefer this way of analysis? Be honest.
No. Now, did I say? No. I have to go back to the first story I told with the giraffes and the rainstorm and the song. That's before the analysis. The analysis happens when this is finished, and we're both now outside it. For me, in my life, until I die, I want to be in this thing when this metal is still in the ground. I want to be digging in the ground, getting dirty, pulling it out, maybe seeing that maybe this shape might exist in that vein of metal in the earth. And that's the place I want to be.
That's a beautiful way to end this evening. Damen und Herren,
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you.